From 1790 to 1800, when Philadelphia was our new nation's capital, Presidents George Washington and John Adams lived and worked in a mansion, the President's House, at 6th and Market Streets. 9 enslaved Africans owned by George Washington also lived in that house. This video provides a glimpse into the long and challenging process that resulted in the creation of the President's House, Freedom and Slavery in the Making of a New Nation, located steps from the Liberty Bell in Independence National Historical Park. The site examines the contradictions, conflicts, and politics surrounding the house, illuminating a little-known fact of America's history, that enslaved Africans toiled for President Washington. Above all, the site pays homage to the 9 people whose names would otherwise be lost to history.
The project actually has 2 beginnings. One is its origins out of community protest, when people realized that that the first 2 U.S. presidents had served their terms of office there.
We found out that this site, America's first White House, is where George Washington held black men, black women, and black children as slaves.
Gary Nash, who has written extensively on the topic, went on a radio show here in Philadelphia, Radio Times, to talk about his book, but he mentioned this. And when he mentioned this, the lines just were abuzz with interest about it. And then within a short period of time, Michael Cord, a lawyer and an activist in Philadelphia, he helped bring this into greater public consciousness by creating an organization called Avenging the Ancestors Coalition.
I was hosting a program on WHAT at the time. So we started talking about it on air, and the callers were absolutely incensed.
So we were absolutely outraged, and we began with a letter writing campaign.
And we started to build support for the notion of a commemoration for the enslaved Africans.
And we wanted to have public investment, which was why, in terms of strategy, it was writing editorials, it was having public meetings, it was staging protests, it was developing and distributing literature, hounding, whether they were public officials or journalists and what have you, to keep this story, because we wanted civic engagement. This was a civic project in which history was now going to count for everybody.
The bone of contention was, what would be the primary focus of this project?
There were some people on the committee who were involved who felt as though the primary focus should be the house, the architecture, and the beautiful story about the founding of the nation.
Or would it be the issue of slavery? And to the extent that there was any real contention, that was and still is the contention.
So we wanted the emphasis to be on these 9 or more enslaved Africans, because that was the new story. That was what had not been disclosed before. So there was always this kind of push and pull between these 2 schools of thought.
Early into the project, we conducted an archaeological dig as part of due diligence, and lo and behold, the archaeologists located actual structural remains from that very house. There was a lot of controversy with respect to whether you just bury it back up and keep it moving with the original plan, or do we rethink this, create another exhibit experience, and then have to raise the money to incorporate it. The project started under Mayor John Street, and then Mayor Michael Nutter came on board.
I just thought it was important that the mayor of the city of Philadelphia, along with our 1.5 million residents, pick up this cause and make this great project happen.
So the congressman, along with Joe Huffle's efforts, Congressman Fattah, all of them got together and said, how can we make this happen? And they were able to secure $3.5 million, and I believe that was in 2003.
The other part about that find is that Most people on the Oversight Committee, especially the African American members of the committee, did not want the archaeology to become the dominant piece of this. I believe that as whites in particular saw evidence of the true existence of this site, it became an opportunity to discuss slavery in a way that it had not resonated with people before. It's almost as if looking down into that pit and seeing passageways where enslaved would serve meals or work in the kitchen really brought a reality that didn't exist before. And it also catapulted the project to a different level of visibility and national importance.
From 1790 to 1800 was an incredibly boisterous, event-filled, dramatic decade.
And this is a world of revolution, and things were a swirl.
The French Revolution had broken out in 1789 as the Congress is getting ready to come here. The Haitian Revolution breaks out in 1791, in the second year that Congress sat here as the nation's capital. And then in the middle of it all, there's this devastating yellow fever epidemic in 1793, wipes out, an extraordinary percentage of the population, something like 10% of the population. A two-party system is just beginning to take shape. It's a very contentious decade, and imagine the challenges of the first two presidents, Washington and John Adams, as they're trying to get the ship of state into calmer water.
You also had in Philadelphia at this time an enormous amount of hope on the part of the African people who lived here, largely because, as you might understand, they had also been through the American Revolution. In the birth of the country and in the presence of this house, you have this incredible situation where everything is coming together. And the struggle for liberty would also be a struggle on the part of the African people for freedom.
Well, Philadelphia was the largest and the most important free black community in the country in the 1790s.
The free black population in Philadelphia was quite large, given the free black populations in other cities.
And it had just emerged as a free black community only a few years before, because most of the African Americans here, when the Revolution broke out, were enslaved. It was in this decade that the first two black independent churches were formed.
The African Methodist Episcopal Church and the African Methodist Episcopal Zion. African people are thinking, and not only are they thinking, but they are building their own institutions.
And schools with them, and other black institutions.
The Free African Society. I mean, there are many things that are going on in that population. The Quaker community is quite active in Philadelphia.
Washington was troubled with slavery, and before he died, he wrote a will providing for the freedom of those enslaved Africans under his control. But while he was here as president, he would have his Mount Vernon slaves here to do the work and do his bidding.
The other thing that we know is that Washington would periodically take Africans back to Virginia because, of course, there was a law.
And the Pennsylvania law of 1780 provided that any person brought into the state would be free after 6 months.
Whenever that time was, 6 months or what have you, Washington would always take them back to Virginia.
Be sure that the person, one of the 9 who were here, would not be freed under this Pennsylvania law.
I must say, this is the first kind of project like this. It's unique. I mean, it's not a straight architectural project. It's an interpretive project.
We didn't rebuild the house. It's an open-air structure.
You can enter the site from several directions, so there is no one direction, but it's likely that most people will be coming from the visitor center across the street, across Market Street, and as they do, they will see the front of the house, and it'll draw them to it. So if they come through the front door, immediately on the left one of the few walls is the first panel that starts to tell you about the house. On the right side is the family dining room, and you can't help but see that fireplace there. And above the fireplace is a video where in 1795 there was probably a painting or a mirror. So one begins to sort of visualize and imagine being in that room because they've been in other houses like that.
There are bronze footprints in a certain area of the site that symbolize escape to freedom. There's the memorial enclosure in the back. It's a very tight space. It once was the livery stable. It's a confined space because we wanted to give a feel for the cramped quarters that many enslaved people throughout this country experienced, that their living conditions were not always ideal. And also that memorial space allows us to pay homage to the various nations or tribes in Africa from whence these enslaved came.
I worked with the writer Lorene Carey to create a number of dramatic vignettes that look at the lives of the enslaved Africans in that house, as well as members of the Free African community in Philadelphia. These were dramatic vignettes, that is, they were scripted, based on historical documents, based on the information that we could find about the Nine. Lorene Carey is an extraordinary writer. She really was this dogged researcher, reading through volumes and volumes of George Washington's papers and journals. This is where a lot of the evidence was. What really inspired us, I think, was really a vision that came from community representatives.
Well, we know some things about some of the enslaved African Americans who were in the president's house.
We have an idea what their lives were like. We know, for example, that they were enslaved by George Washington. We know also that to be enslaved was not merely to be a servant. To be enslaved meant that you were chattel. And to be chattel meant that you were property. To be property meant that you basically had no rights at all.
You were in law a thing, and you could be bought, sold, traded, exchanged, given away as a gift. In the case of Oni Judge, she was the maidservant of Martha Washington. And as such, she would have had a contact with the whole of the Washington family and would have actually gone outside of the house as well, so that she would have interactions with a lot of different people.
Often they run the errands, they do the shopping, they tend the horses, so they're out and about the city.
I mean, just going out to walk to the market every day to get the food that had to be cooked and prepared means that you're out talking to a wide variety of people. And I have this sense of them walking out and doing that, and someone saying, here, let me talk to you for a minute. Do you really want to continue to stay there as an enslaved person? Think about the possibilities, and if you think you want to leave, come talk to us, we'll help you.
And she runs away, and she runs away because she knows that she's, quote, going to be given away, which could happen to any enslaved person. I mean, you didn't control your own life, no matter how much latitude you had in terms of your skills or what have you in the end. And so she made a decision that it was better for her to have freedom, even being bereft of part of her family, than to continue to be enslaved to another person, even though it was a member of the Washington family.
When she left the house and made it down to the waterfront, and the ship, there was a ship there, and she got on that ship and she was out of here. Well, we don't know the details, but I don't think it could have happened without this kind of web of connections between free and slave.
We tell the story of the founding of the country, and so this exhibit is just perfect. It fits in with our main interpretive themes. In fact, it richly illustrates one of the main interpretive themes.
I'm excited being the head of an African American museum that is 4 blocks away, because we get to really create a context for what this story is about and what it means.
We'd like to have this project continue to generate conversation and discovery. It has great potential to do that.
While men were talking about freedom, other men and women were enslaved within a block away from each other. That's the great contradiction here. That's the great juxtaposition, but it's also the great story that must be told within the context of the most historic square mile anywhere in the United States of America.
10 years after the debate began, the President's House, Freedom and Slavery in the Making of a New Nation, is now open. In the heart of our nation's birthplace, we reveal a hidden story of our common past. It's a story that should inspire dialogue and understanding and remind visitors of our collective responsibility to ensure the freedoms promised by America's founding.